So the offertory is a specific part in a Christian service where members of the community, the Christian community, bring forward offerings from the community to the church on behalf of the people. Now, this tradition goes way back in the Christian church to a time when in the early Christian church you had many people in the community, both rich and poor. And what the people would do was gather together and everyone would bring forward their money or their food or whatever they had to offer. They would give it to the church, and then the church, as the central role in the community, would redistribute it. So at church, you will normally see two things for sure that will always come up in the offertory: wine and bread. The bread and the wine is going to be directly used at the church service for the Lord's Supper or the Eucharist or communion or whatever you call it. So this is the part where the wine and the bread are brought forward. In addition to the wine or the bread, you'll notice that there's also something else, like money or maybe canned goods or something that the community is offering up to the church to be able to help the poor in their community. So it's kind of like the church's job to take this stuff and then redistribute it to other people. Also important to note that in early Christian communities, when they gathered to have church services like this, they did practice the Lord's Supper with the bread and wine. They did have communion, but then after that, they would also just like literally eat a meal. Like they would have a bunch of other food that they would sit down and eat. So this is sort of a symbolic commemoration of those early Christian celebrations, as well as a non-symbolic, sometimes basket of literal money that the church then used to help will use to help poor people. The people bringing this stuff forward are normally members of the congregation, and normally there's a kind of path or aisle down the middle of the church where these people will walk. This is a symbolic part of the architecture of the church, so that there's this movement that the people bringing up the offertory are coming from the people. They actually come from the congregation forward towards the altar, so that it's a symbolic gesture of, here's our stuff, our community stuff, we are giving it to the church. So it looks something like this. What we're going to do now is take a quick journey around the world, stopping off in a few different countries and observing how those countries practice the offertory. So watch carefully. After each video, I'll have a couple of reflection questions. We're going to stop in about 5 or 6 different countries. Before we begin, though, I want to emphasize each country we're about to visit is practicing a specifically Catholic Mass. Now, this is important because if we happen to visit a bunch of different churches that were different denominations, like Baptist and Catholic and Lutheran and Orthodox, you would say, well, maybe these differences are the result of different actual denominations in Christianity. And this is not the case. Every single church we're going to visit in these videos is Catholic. So any differences you'll notice are not because they're different denominations or different religions, but because they are from different cultures. It's the culture of their country that's coming to play in the ritual. So let's go ahead and begin our journey. We're going to start here in the United States. I don't remember what city this is, but it'll tell us when we start. Okay, so I think this is actually Philadelphia, but... So a couple of things we're going to reflect on after each of these videos. Number 1, who's involved in participating in the offertory? Number 2, how does the space, the actual building or the space where the ceremony is happening, how does that aid in what's happening? Um, Third, we're going to look at music. How does the music contribute to the worship service? And yeah, that's probably about it. Mostly we're looking at kind of like pros and cons of different ritual practices. Um, so you can see in this video, this is, if any of you are Christians who live in this area, this may look kind of familiar to you. This is your standard church hymn with an organ. So you have people singing, or at least they're supposed to be singing. Not a lot of people are singing. You've got an organ slightly playing in the background. The people involved here are an older couple who are actually bringing up the bread and wine. You have an altar server leading them. You'll notice it's a very like rigid, straightforward practice. It's you start at the back, you walk to the front, you're done. So now let's take a trip to, let's see, I think we're heading to the continent of Africa. I'm not sure which country. Let's take a look. Okay, Zambia. So a couple of differences you notice right off the bat. Number one, we are outside. We are not in a church building. We are outside. You'll notice these people do have a church. It's there in the background, but they are not using the church. This is kind of a normal thing that you'll see in some of the hotter regions, especially places like Zambia, where it does get very hot. Getting all these people cooped up in a building is going to be just like sweltering. So you have the celebration outside. So as far as the question goes, how does the space help the ritual? One nice thing about having an outdoor worship service like this is that you have sort of the freedom to set up the space how you want. You'll notice there's a lot more people involved here. You have a larger group that's moving up towards the altar. If you didn't catch it, the actual offertory you can rewind the video. There's a couple of women who are carrying these very large baskets on their heads. That's where the actual offering of the community is that's moving up to the altar. Now, perhaps the biggest difference you'll notice from the first video to this video is that you see a lot more movement. The people who are bringing up the offering are moving. They're dancing. I wouldn't go so far as to say that this is a choreographed dance, but there's definitely a rhythm and a movement to how the offertory is brought forward. And it's not just the people who are actually bringing the offertory forward. You'll notice right here that we're paused here at the end. There's all these children. They're all dancing too. This is a stark contrast from the first one. You'll notice that in communities like, for instance, Philadelphia, that are primarily people from Europe, Scandinavia, traditionally European, and especially Scandinavian churches tend to be very rigid, quieter, more subdued. And you got that in the first video. Not a lot of people singing, not a lot of people moving. And in fact, one of those people, if they visited this church, might even be shocked at how many people are moving and dancing. They'd be like, what is going on? This is craziness. You compare that to cultures like, for instance, in Zambia, where a lot of African countries, the movement of the body is such a key part of the ritual that people in churches like these would say, actually, I can't even participate in a worship service unless my body's moving. It's like an integral part of what we're doing. We're now going to travel. I think we're going to keep moving. No, actually, I'm not sure where we're going next. Let's just take a look together. Okay, this is Nassau. This is in the Bahamas. So you'll notice this one is more similar to the first video. Key differences being in the architecture. You'll notice the pews where people are sitting are actually facing each other. This is a kind of an old tradition in a lot of churches. They would design churches this way so that there's more an emphasis on community. It's like the people are facing each other, like we're all participating together, rather than having all the pews facing forward, where it's like you're all watching a show. It's more like it's supposed to be more communal. You can tell this is very, very reverent. Everyone is dressed very nicely. There are candles accompanying the offertory to the front. You didn't see that in the first video. The first video was kind of like, here, let's get this done. This video, there's a lot more reverence to what's happening. Other than that, it is, again, kind of similar to the first one. So now we're going to keep moving. I believe our next one's taking us into Asia. I don't actually remember what country. Let's find out.